Hello everyone, welcome back TV Spoilers. Matt doesn't need to break iron doors or use brute force to slip out of Victor's grip. What he needs is a narrow crack, a single softened moment. A conscience that hesitates at exactly the wrong time. And in Genoa City right now, no one's hesitation is more dangerous than Nikki's. Victor and Jack believe they control the pulse of everything. That Matt is merely a variable locked away until the day he can be dealt with cleanly, quietly, and without a trace. But that very secrecy is what makes Nikki see something else. A blurred line between justice and cruelty. Between protecting the family and turning the family into an excuse for anything. Matt's return already feels like a resurrected shadow. Someone who should have stayed dead in other people's memories, yet keeps rising with new masks and shifting identities. As if he survives by making everyone around him doubt what they're truly looking at. The truth of Matt is always a maze, and even if Victor uses power to suffocate his options, the unsettling sense that Matt can still slip through the cracks of any system is what Nikki cannot silence inside herself. Matt understands Nikki in a way Victor refuses to admit. Victor treats Nikki like the last piece of humanity he keeps close enough to justify himself. Jack treats Nikki like the moral anchor that prevents a plan from sliding into the abyss. Matt, however, sees Nikki as a lock that can be opened from the inside. Someone who will remove the bolt with her own hands. Because she cannot bear the sound of metal grinding against her conscience. While he is being held, Matt doesn't spend his time studying camera angles or guard rotations alone. He studies Nikki's breathing in the rare moments she enters the orbit of Victor's control. Nikki does not have to speak and Matt does not have to hear words. He only needs the way her gaze slows when she senses Victor going too far. The brief tightening of her fingers as if she wants to pull herself away from what she's witnessing. Matt once lived by making people afraid, but now he survives by making people feel like they are still decent, still right, still capable of saving someone from Victor. He turns Nikki's worry into a wire and he knows exactly how to place the bait. The fake evidence Matt sends Nikki does not have to be sophisticated enough to fool Victor. It only has to be believable to someone who wants to believe. He arranges the false information like a moral portrait. Victor is not merely planning to handle Matt, Victor is planning to crush him beyond legal limits. Beyond any standard Nikki still clings to so she does not have to see her husband as a stranger. Matt makes Nikki feel that if she does nothing, she becomes complicit in cruelty. If she stays silent, she is the person standing beside Victor when he crosses the last line. The horror is that Nikki does not act because she cares about Matt, or even because she thinks Matt is good. She acts because she fears Victor becoming monstrous in a way that cannot be reversed. In Victor's world, hesitation is weakness, but in Nikki's world, hesitation is sometimes the last thing that keeps her from turning into stone. Nikki does not choose a direct confrontation. She knows that if she tries to stop Victor with words, Victor will treat it like betrayal. If she pulls Jack out of the plan, Jack will look at her with that mixture of concern and suspicion. And suspicion will harden into control. The very thing Nikki resents almost as much as Victor's control over Matt. So Nikki chooses silence. She chooses to make an adjustment no one notices. It begins with details that look harmless on the surface, tiny changes in the transport plan. A security link weakened not by obvious sabotage but by a subtle shift that seems reasonable. Nikki keeps telling herself it is only a safeguard. That she is only preventing Victor from going too far. That if the operation remains in Victor and Jack's hands, no one truly gets hurt. But the truth is, the moment Nikki touches the system, she steps into Victor's world in the most dangerous way. She interferes with power, while still believing she is doing the right thing. And power always punishes those who think they can brush against it without paying a price. Matt waits for the exact moment. He does not rush. He lets Nikki simmer in her own guilt. Lets the feeling of I have to do something grow like a fever under the skin. When the gap appears, Matt does not need to cause an explosion. He only needs to slide through it. His escape becomes the most humiliating kind of failure for Victor and Jack, not an external attack, but an internal unraveling caused by the very mercy they believed they had contained. Matt disappears, leaving behind a silence so unnatural it feels like a warning. The disaster is not the second he runs. The disaster is the second they realize he has been gone longer than they dared imagine. Victor's anger does not flare like a gust of wind. It rises like thick smoke in a sealed room, choking everyone even when no flames are visible. Victor and Jack stand inside the failure, each of them seeing in the other a portion of blame they refuse to carry alone. Jack cedes because the plan has been broken. Because the careful calculations have been turned into a joke. Victor cedes because he has been challenged. Because he has been forced to admit that something inside his own house no longer obeys him. But the most dangerous part is that neither of them knows Nikki has unintentionally created the breach. That ignorance makes the anger search for the wrong target. Makes Victor tighten his grip even harder, become colder. More willing to cross the very limits Nikki was trying to prevent in the first place. And because Nikki does not confess, she is not merely hiding her action. She is hiding the true reason Victor is becoming even more ruthless. Nikki walks into a private kind of hell, the hell of someone who did the wrong thing, while believing it was right. She looks at Victor with a new fear, not simply fear of what he might do to Matt, but fear of what he will do if he discovers someone interfered. At the same time, she fears Matt in a different way. She fears his freedom, fears his revenge, fears that he will use Nikki as a shield or, worse, use her as the blade that cuts Victor from the inside. She cannot confess to Victor, because confession would mean placing herself directly in the path of his fury, and it would mean admitting she chose Matt in some moment, even if what she truly chose was not letting Victor go too far. But she also cannot live peacefully knowing she opened the door. Every day, she lives as if she hears Matt's footsteps in the hallway, even when no one is there. Every time Victor stays silent a beat too long, Nikki thinks he knows. Every time Jack's eyes linger on her like he is measuring something, Nikki feels the floor tilt beneath her. And Matt, now free, begins doing what he has always done best, applying pressure from the dark. He does not need to appear. His presence lives in the feeling that Victor cannot protect what Victor claims is untouchable. Matt understands Victor is powered by control, so Matt attacks by forcing Victor to react. He spreads a new kind of chaos, not with fists, but with scattered signals that compel Victor to assemble them into a terrifying picture. Matt did not merely escape, he escaped with intention. Like a statement that the game is not over, like proof that Victor has lost inside his own strength. That leaves Nikki trapped between two cliffs, with no safe ground on either side. If she confesses, she risks losing Victor, losing trust, and turning herself into a target in a war she is not ruthless enough to win. If she stays silent, she lets Victor accelerate down a colder path, and she gives Matt more room to manipulate her through guilt. Nikki begins to realize what Matt truly wants is not only freedom. He wants Victor and Nikki to tear each other apart from the inside. He wants Nikki to believe she can control Victor with tenderness so that when everything collapses, Nikki will understand she was the first brick to fall out of the foundation. Matt wins the way he has always won. He does not have to defeat an opponent. He only has to make the opponent break themselves. Night falls and the tension is no longer a moment. It becomes a condition. The angrier Victor grows, the quieter he becomes, and the quieter he becomes, the more Nikki's fear expands. The more Jack pushes Victor to tighten the plan, the more Victor begins to act alone. And that isolation is exactly what Matt is waiting for. Nikki can see a near future in which Victor trusts no one completely, not even Jack. And certainly not Nikki the way he once did. But she can also see something even worse. If Victor stops trusting Nikki, then everything Nikki has done to protect him will become evidence against her. Nikki will no longer be the person holding Victor's moral boundary. She will become the boundary Victor wants to erase so he never has to feel wrong. And then the hook arrives in the cruelest way, not loud, not theatrical on the surface, but like a direct cut into a nerve. Nikki knows Matt escaped through the breach she created. But what she does not know is whether Matt understands where that breach came from. Because if Matt knows, then the pressure he is now applying to Victor from hiding will not stay aimed at Victor alone. It will circle back to Nikki like a titan collar, forcing her to choose fully between Victor and the man she unintentionally freed. And at the exact moment Nikki has that thought, she senses Victor revisiting the failure with a new angle, as if he has just realized the plan was not broken from the outside at all but touched from within, by a hand far too familiar. Matt didn't come back to Genoa City to win through sheer force. And he certainly didn't come back to win by standing face to face with Victor after escaping. What Matt carries isn't just vengeance, it's a cold understanding of how empires actually collapse. They don't fall because an enemy throws the hardest punch. They fall because someone taps an old crack at the exact right point at the exact right moment, in the exact right way. Matt has seen Victor at his most invincible, and he has also seen Victor at his most vulnerable years ago. Now Matt chooses revenge with the one weapon Victor hates because it can't be bought, buried, or strangled with money, a truth that was sealed away too long, ripped into the light with the speed of a media storm. There is a serious mistake in Victor's past, something that may have drifted through the city as a rumor at times, but only a few people ever knew how specific it truly was, how corrosive it could be, how quickly it could flip Victor's public image on its head. What makes it more dangerous isn't only the mistake itself, but who knew about it and who chose to hide it. Jack knew. Jack kept it quiet. And Jack didn't keep it quiet out of kindness or loyalty to Victor. Jack kept it because he understands their world runs on leverage and secrets. Heavy enough to place on the table at the right time. Deep enough to make even the strongest man hesitate. Jack stored it like a folded knife in his pocket, never pulling it too early. Never swinging it too soon. Waiting for the day Victor would be forced to pay a price he couldn't reverse with power. Matt sees that, and Matt realizes that if this secret goes public, both titans will be dragged into a defensive crouch at the same time, one for committing the wrong, the other for protecting the silence because it benefited him. He chooses to let the world speak for him. A mysterious journalist receives information. Details arranged as if someone mapped the investigation in advance, and simply handed the reporter a trail worth following. That structure makes it more terrifying because it doesn't feel like a rushed smear campaign. It feels calculated, specific enough to ignite curiosity, heavy enough to demand verification, sensitive enough that the public will feel entitled to judge. As the journalist begins digging, the questions stop being whispers in the hallways of power. They become emails, calls, closed-door meetings. The kind of lingering eye contact where people try to guess who is panicking, who is hiding, who is already preparing to sacrifice someone else. When the article finally drops, it doesn't merely reveal, it exposes. The story frames Victor's past mistake in a way that forces readers to feel betrayed by the image they've learned to accept, the man who claims he protects his family, his legacy. The order of things, suddenly placed beside a wrongdoing so severe it threatens the moral foundation Victor has always used as armor for his power. The Newman Empire trembles not just because numbers could shift or competitors could circle, but because trust is being pulled from the base. Public outrage rises fast, almost instinctively, because people love a target that feels earned, a symbol they're finally allowed to drag down. And in a world where outrage moves faster than truth, a few hours is all it takes for the story to escape the control of any PR team and flood conversations everywhere, every dinner table, every office, every corner of the city where Victor's name once signified dominance. Victor is thrown into a massive media crisis, but what suffocates him isn't only the article. It's the sensation of being surrounded by a narrative he didn't write, forced to react instead of attack. His reputation takes a kind of damage that is difficult to repair because it strikes the past, and the past is harder to argue with than the present. In the present, Victor can deny, negotiate, purchase time. But in the past, every denial becomes a new question. Every attempt at control looks like an effort to smear the evidence rather than face it. Victor is forced into urgent action, not only to keep the empire from tipping, but to save the image of the man he needs his family and the world to believe is always right. While Victor strains to contain the fallout, Jack is pulled into the mess in a way he didn't expect. Or perhaps he did expect but believed he could maneuver out of it. Because the article doesn't only describe Victor's mistake, it asks the sharper question, who knew and who stayed silent? Once Jack's name appears in the web of suspicion, the situation turns poisonous. It paints Jack not as a principled rival, but as a strategist who kept the truth locked away not out of morality but out of calculation. The public begins to look at Jack with the same suspicion they now throw at Victor, powerful men, who can quietly protect each other's interests, while publicly pretending to stand for higher standards. And the pressure doesn't stay outside. It leaks into Jack's personal world, into the relationships he has always used to distinguish himself from Victor. People's eyes no longer offer easy trust. Jack is forced to face the most haunting question of all. If he once covered for Victor, is he truly different from Victor, or only different in the language he uses to justify himself? Victor and Jack collide, and even if they try to keep the temperature down, the tension between them is primal predators forced into the same cage. Each understands this is a dangerous moment. If they tear each other apart in public, the only person who truly benefits is Matt, somewhere unseen. But neither can resist blaming the other, because the cost is enormous and ego doesn't bend easily under pressure. Victor sees Jack as the opportunist who kept the secret like a noose, waiting for the day to tighten it. Jack sees Victor as the man whose original wrongdoing has now dragged everyone down with him. Their confrontation doesn't require shouting to feel violent. The long silences are sharp enough, the heavy stares brutal enough, the unspoken accusations deep enough to cut. They must fight the public narrative while also trying to clarify things to each other, as if one of them trusting the other could rebuild a defensive wall. But trust between them was never built out of loyalty. It was built out of rivalry, and rivalry is a fragile foundation when the storm hits. In the middle of this chaos, Matt vanishes. It is his smartest and cruelest move, because it removes the obvious target Victor and Jack could unite against. If Matt stayed visible, they could name him, hunt him, turn him into a shared enemy, and temporarily set their suspicion aside. But Matt steps off the stage at the perfect moment, leaving consequences running on their own like a machine already wound. Now Victor and Jack must suffer the blow without a body to strike back at. Like two men locked inside a burning room arguing over who bought the insurance and who forgot to turn off the stove while smoke is already filling their lungs. Matt's disappearance creates another kind of fear, the fear of what he hasn't released yet. If he could expose a secret strong enough to shake the Newman Empire, what else is he holding? And the most unbearable thing about power is that it cannot tolerate the feeling of being controlled by someone who isn't even present. Victor hates being forced to react to a ghost. Jack hates being turned into a secondary character in Matt's plan. Yet both men are pushed to accept that they're playing on a board Matt arranged in advance. And the next move could come from anywhere at any time. That is why Nikki stands at the edge of another cliff where every choice hurts. Nikki doesn't only witness the consequence, she feels them crawling under her skin. Because she knows Matt didn't become stronger simply because he escaped. Matt escaped because there was a gap. And Nikki cannot fully silence the thought that today's chaos may be feeding on yesterday's hesitation. When Victor's past is exposed, Nikki is pulled toward her husband by instinct, by loyalty, by the desire to protect the family. But she is also pulled the other way by conscience, by the fear that Victor Conrad will cross lines he can never uncross. Nikki understands that a crisis like this doesn't only make people angry, it makes them desperate. And Victor, when desperate, can become the version of himself Nikki fears most, colder, harder, willing to remove every moral barrier just to reclaim control. Nikki also recognizes a brutal truth: once the public believes a story, the silence of those closest to Victor will be interpreted in the worst possible way. If Nikki stands too tightly beside Victor, the world will call her complicit. If Nikki hesitates, Victor will feel betrayed. She is trapped between love, responsibility, and the fear that her attempts to do the right thing will somehow make Matt even stronger. She wants to believe Matt is only punishing Victor. But the article drags Jack into the fire, and once Jack is burning too, this stops being a personal vendetta. It becomes a landslide that swallows everyone near the center of power, whether they asked for it or not. Victor moves fast to put out the flames, but in Nikki's eyes, each step looks like a slide toward extremity. Victor has to stabilize the empire, protect the name, slow the narrative, trace the journalist, identify the source, and shut the pipeline down. He must think like a warrior. But Nikki sees a man with the past tightening around his throat. Jack, trying to protect himself, cannot hold on to the moral high ground anymore. He has to explain why he knew and stayed quiet. He has to confront the reality that silence is now being defined as guilt. The more both men defend themselves, the more they resemble each other in the public's eyes, and that is Matt's greatest victory, erasing the line between the villain and the rival, leaving the world with only powerful men who manipulate and conceal while preaching principles. The tension thickens until it feels like everything could break from one new message. One follow-up article, one question asked at exactly the wrong time. Victor and Jack must maintain a media front while also surviving a private front. They no longer have the luxury of fully trusting each other, but they also don't have the luxury of destroying each other. It's like a house on fire where two men still argue about blame, while the smoke has already stolen the air. And because they're forced to turn back or to defend the past, they're also robbed of the chance to control the future. Matt has taken the future hostage by chaining them to an old mistake, making them pay not only in money and power, but in humiliation and exposure. In the feeling of being stripped naked under public judgment, Matt vanishes without a trace, and that absence becomes more frightening than his presence. Absence invites imagination. Victor begins to read every movement as a sign of Matt. Jack begins to distrust every channel, every leak, every ally. Nikki begins to hear warning bells in her head every time Victor's expression shifts. No one says Matt's name loudly, but he is everywhere like ink beneath the skin. Impossible to erase, especially now that the truth is out. There is no returning to the moment before the article. There is no sealing Pandora's box once it's opened. And when Nikki's mind begins to circle the question, what is the worst thing that can happen, it stops being theoretical. It becomes a premonition. Nikki knows Matt survives by exploiting other people's mistakes. And Nikki also knows Victor can retaliate in ways no one expects when he's cornered. The worst outcome isn't simply Victor and Jack losing reputation. The worst outcome is that they are forced to choose the ugliest versions of themselves to survive. And in that process, Nikki may be crushed, because she is one of the last soft points left in their circle of power. If Nikki intervenes, she could accidentally create another breach. If she doesn't, she may have to watch Victor slide into darkness without being able to pull him back. Every option smells like guilt. And all Matt needs is for Nikki to believe she's fixing something, so she walks herself into a trap. In the end, what Matt leaves behind isn't only an article. He leaves a war with no clear opponent. A war where Victor and Jack are forced to stare into their own past and ask who created today's monster. Victor must brace against public fury. Jack must justify himself to those who once believed in him. Nikki must survive the knowledge that any movement she makes can be interpreted as betrayal. And while they struggle to breathe, Matt could be anywhere near or far waiting for the next moment to strike. Without ever showing his face, the hook lands when everyone thinks they've hit bottom. Victor begins retracing every step, not only to figure out how Matt fed the journalist, but to understand why Matt always finds a way through their defenses. The deeper Victor digs, the more one detail refuses to fit an intervention too subtle, a gap too perfectly timed, a weakness only someone close to him could have created without meaning to. And when Victor turns toward Nikki, the look in his eyes doesn't need words to freeze the room, because it carries a question he hasn't spoken yet but has already made Nikki's spine go cold. Is Victor starting to suspect that Matt didn't just weaponize his past, but weaponized Nikki's good intentions to ignite all of this?